Program Coordinator for OneOp. It is my pleasure to welcome you to today's session on Special Operations Nutrition Optimization. In case you are joining us for the first time, I would like to give a brief tour of our webinar platform so you can find your way around. Hopefully, you are currently able to view the slides we are sharing. If you are unable to see them or have any other difficulties, please email us at contact@oneop.org for tech support. As some of you have already done, we look forward to having you join us in the chat pod for conversation and questions. Several people have already shared the location they are joining us from today. Please continue to do that if you'd like. To embed the chat pod so you don't miss any links or conversation, simply place your cursor over the shared slides. You will then see a toolbar pop up across the bottom of your screen. From there, just click the chat bubble icon. When typing questions or comments, please be sure to select everyone from the response options drop-down menu so everyone can view them in the chat pod. Please note that the slides and resources are available for download on the event page for today's session. We will be covering continuing education information at the end of the webinar, so please stay tuned at the end if you are interested in continuing education credits or a certificate of attendance. Closed captioning is available for this webinar. You can turn on the subtitles via the Zoom toolbar. If you need to step away from today's webinar at any time, please know that a recording will be available on demand within 2 business days on the event page. Today's webinar is part of OneOp's Nutrition for the Tactical Athlete series. Tactical athletes are military personnel, police, firefighters, and first responders. The Defense Department alone has over 2 million active duty and reserve component members who are all considered tactical athletes. These professionals have unique health and nutritional needs. Following today's webinar, one additional live webinar will be held in July titled Engineering Food for Warfighter Performance. Attend the live webinars in this series or view them on demand to learn how the Defense Department meets tactical athletes' nutrition needs in the environments in which they serve and develop your skill set for supporting the nutrition needs of tactical athletes. Thank you for joining us as we continue our partnership with the Defense Department and the U.S. Department of Agriculture to expand the readiness, knowledge, and networks of the professionals supporting our military service members and their families. The views expressed in this presentation do not necessarily reflect the official policy of the Defense Department, U.S. Department of Agriculture, U.S. government, or OneOp. The mention of any entity or product is for informational purposes only. Today, I am very pleased to introduce our speaker, Kelsey Bailey. Kelsey is the full-time performance dietitian for Eternal, a healthcare company for athletes, as well as a performance dietitian for her own business, Be Well. She spent 7.5 years with Special Operations, formerly with professional sport, and is currently a consulting performance dietitian within the tactical space of fire and police. Her special interest areas include optimizing health and performance related to sleep, stress, and weight management, and hormone health. She also has a vested interest in allostatic load, care for traumatic brain injury, fertility, heavy metal and environmental exposures, and gastrointestinal health. She lives in Denver with her husband and 3 rambunctious little boys. I will now turn it over to Kelsey to start the webinar.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. It's so fun to see how many different representations we have across the United States this morning. So we're going to jump right on in because we've got a lot to go through today. And I really wanted to start this presentation with the acknowledgement that probably any one of the sections that we're going to go through today could be a webinar in and of itself. So, oh, there we go. So just a few of my disclosures. Like Bethany so kindly mentioned, I work with Eternal, and I also consult with Momentous, the supplement company, on education development. So we'll go through a little bit of our learning objectives surrounding how are we looking at these different stages of feeding special operators, whether it be proactive, active, or reactive, understanding the environmental conditions and mission type that they may need to go through and how that changes nutritional demand, and really some big longer term considerations as to the long-term health of operators, especially as it relates to um, traumatic brain injury, and some of those environmental exposures, and then how do we track some of those things. And again, each one of these bullets I've done an entire 60 to 90-minute webinar on. So again, there's so much to deep dive on some of these, but really today's goal is to equip anyone who's interested in understanding this realm, with some of the big considerations that we have. I am so grateful for my time in special operations and for all the colleagues, because really working as a part of a multidisciplinary team is how we give really, really comprehensive care to all of our military service members. So let's get started. We mentioned the kind of three big areas, and if you haven't already seen this paper from Karen Daigle and Christy Logan, it's a beautiful outline of how do you get a performance program started with nutrition? What are some big considerations to have? Where do we need buy-in to even action on some of the interventions that we'd like to do? And I love the viewpoint of separating it out into this proactive, active, and reactive aspects of the job. Um, so if we start with proactive, that's really looking at our foundational health, and that's where we're going to start today is what kind of base are we creating, knowing that when we go into active, when we go into what mission set am I going on, what needs to be done, how strong is my base that I'm operating off of? And then over here on the reactive side is all the things that could happen within the job, whether that be illness, whether that be injury, whether that be longer term disease that obviously we're trying to mitigate as best as we can, but knowing that we are equipped with the tools to be able to track and trend those things appropriately. So that's how I broke down this presentation today. But I want to also really recognize the outer parts of this circle is we have organizational culture. So how is nutrition received at the particular unit that you're with, and what kind of rapport has been built? And then what are the resources that we have to action on? I shared a porta potty with 150 men every single day for almost 8 years. And so running water wasn't a resource that I had at my exact office location. And that changes some of the things that we can do from nutrition. And so there's really just some sometimes humorous, sometimes not things as a from a resources standpoint, of how do we actually take interventions and make them come to life. So let's dive into that proactive side. When I talk about performance nutrition with any tactical population, I always ask, what do you initially think of? And most commonly, especially when I'm presenting to any sort of service member, they talk about body comp. And likely because of the standards that need to be met, but I would argue one of the maybe least exciting aspects of nutrition, and really encouraging understanding that foundation of nutrition is kind of like sleep. When it's dialed in, it can support things to feel really, really good from performance and stress management and long-term disease. But when it's off, a lot of things feel way harder. So we really, really focus on how strong is that foundation when we are fueling often unknown situations. We may not know exactly how long a training will last. We may not know exactly the weather conditions. We may not know exactly how long a mission set is on a deployment. Um, how do we support immune system function and reduce that long-term disease risk? How do we support cognitive function? This is a huge one I love to present on collaboratively with cognitive performance specialists as a part of that multidisciplinary team because they're so intertwined. If we don't have fuel going to the brain, if we're dehydrated, how are we able to best triage a situation that we're getting into? Can we positively identify targets, or is that getting impacted by a lack of nutrition or dehydration? Looking at more chronic medical conditions. So does somebody have diabetes or cardiovascular disease? Um, Going back to this body composition, really what I like to focus on a lot instead of an exact number of body comp, because most dietitians out there will know that it is one piece, one tiny tool. But really what we have a bigger question on is, can you move the way you need to move to do your job, or are we an injury risk or a liability for our team? And then coming down here, back to injury recovery and surgery. So how are we best supporting, pre and post surgical interventions? How are we supporting your rehabilitation to get back onto duty in a safe, effective timeline? And then the performance recovery is maybe an additional thing that people think of when they think of performance nutrition in the military is what are we doing before? What are we doing during a mission? What are we doing post training to make sure that we're recovering really, really well to support that repeatability of training? So in this, we have to start with our foundation. So what are our meals? What are our snacks? Kind of maybe not the most exciting thing when it comes to nutrition, but really that's our foundation. Are we drinking enough water? Do we have enough carbohydrates to do the work demand that we're asking the body to do? Do I have enough protein times throughout the day? Do I have access to food? I know that Dr. Joyce in the previous session to mine talked about the social determinants of health. That really plays a huge role in this foundational nutrition. And I, relatively harp on this frequently in talks that I do because 93% of us have some sort of deficiency in this foundation, whether it be not eating enough to support our training demand, whether it be a micronutrient deficiency, something like vitamin D or iron. But really thinking about how strong is that foundation we're trying to build off of, and then we go into optimization. And as I think about it with special operations, outside of, okay, can we get this foundational nutrition on board, typically more garrison feeding, maybe we have dining facilities, then we go into environment. Am I in hot? Am I in cold? Am I in an air-conditioned building that I get to go into and then go into an air-conditioned building to do my training session? Or am I out in the field? Then we kind of dive into mission specific. So again, environment is a piece of that, but then are we dropping in from a helicopter into 10,000 feet of elevation, or are we going to be out for a mission that's going to be a full 24 hours, and we're looking at fueling that? And then I think about this tippy top of the pyramid as of the optimization is thinking about what else strategically are we thinking about? So supplementation may be a consideration within this particular, tippy top of the pyramid. Are we strategically utilizing things to help with sleep or with stress management, whether through nutrition or through supplementation, kind of that tippy top of the pyramid? But when we look at this, oftentimes folks will come to me with this pyramid flip-flopped, and you can imagine that if this tippy top is at the bottom, think about supplementation, for instance. If somebody's really trying to out supplement their diet, it's going to be very, very difficult to have sustained performance, especially in special operations, but really within all tactical athletes. So really educating from how do we start down here to build up that strong foundation, knowing we're going to have times of unknown fueling. It's going to happen. It's a part of the job. And how do we mitigate deficits in performance and cognitive function as best as we can? So kind of breaking down that foundation even further, one of my favorite taglines is you're only as strong as that foundation you're building. So if we have bricks removed, again, not as strong. So three different buckets that I like to think about with this foundation is most importantly, where is our energy availability? And we're going to go into that in a little bit more detail, but at the baseline, do we have enough fuel to give the body to do all the things it needs to do for the job? And really, in times of unknown feeding, do we have pennies in the bank? Have we invested enough into that foundation to know that it's strong enough to withstand? Looking at the next kind of block within that is, do we have the fuel for the type of work we're trying to do? So am I going into training sessions of power and strength and speed, fasted, hoping to get out this optimal adaptation to that particular training session. Might not happen if we don't have the appropriate fuel on board for the work we're demanding of the body. And this also plays a role into environments, which we'll touch on a little bit as well. And I think people maybe underestimate this adaptation piece of this, because that's really, we don't want our training sessions that we're doing for deployments or for just the job generally to be for naught or be a waste. We want to make sure we're getting that full adaptation for strength, for speed, for mobility, for aerobic endurance that we're looking for. And then looking at recovery and resilience. So another favorite kind of tagline that myself and the strength coaches always used to say is you can only train as hard as you recover. So if we're not prioritizing making sure we're getting not only nutrition recovery on board, but appropriate periodization of training. Again, this is a huge part of that multidisciplinary team, but looking at supporting that day after day. Oftentimes people would come in and say, Monday, squat day, we feel great, but by Friday, I feel like garbage and my training sessions feel impossible to get through and my legs feel like lead. This is a big area of recovery then that we're missing. And looking at how do we periodize our fuel accordingly for that, because not every single training session is the same. And so ideally we're able to, flux and adapt for that based off of maybe an increased demand or a decreased demand, based off of what the work is going to require. So let's delve into that energy availability side a little bit more. Um, I love describing energy availability like a house. And for those dietitians out there, you're probably super familiar with energy availability. So bear with me as I describe it in my my little nuanced way. Um, but for all intents and purposes, prior to getting into my house analogy, energy availability is the amount of calories we feed lean tissue and essential function of the body, and then everything else we're asking of it. So, what that very practically means in our house analogy is we are able to pay all the bills. So, if your body is a house, all water, electric, gas. We have a landscaper. There, the shingles are looking great. The paint is fresh. And what that very practically means within the body is brain and organs have enough fuel going to them, muscle has enough, and that's muscle tissue recovery, that's tendon and ligament health. This is bone reformation. Bone is constantly turning over. So think about the the bones of the house. There's no termite damage. The foundation's super strong. Think about hormone health, um, especially adrenal hormones, our thyroid hormones, and our sex hormones all require enough energy, and our immune system function. So at just a very baseline, that kind of baseline function, is needs are met and ready to go. And then we add on stress, and that could be mental stress, that could be financial stress, that could be training stress of really, really wanting to do a good job, that could be learning new things. Think about training stress, so that's purposeful training, lifting, running, sprinting, whatever that might be, and then all the other stuff you do during the day. So walking around to and from your car, maybe you're a spouse or a parent or a friend and you're walking around on the earth. In good energy availability, all of those buckets I mentioned are full and all bills are paid. House is super strong, and if a giant gust of wind comes through, there is a low likelihood that this house is going to be damaged. And often what I'll see is for whatever reason, it could be intentional, unintentional, we're not eating enough. So all of a sudden, instead of staying in this good energy availability, our house now looks like this. And oftentimes I'll see this surrounding a tape test or a PT test where people are really trying to cut calories in a very short time frame, and they're putting themselves in this compromised situation where all of a sudden we don't have enough money for all of the bills to be paid. And so the body then has to make a decision. So instead of prioritizing um, a lot of these big anabolic functions like muscle tissue recovery and bone, it is paying attention to that which it's forced to do, which is the stress side, the training, and the moving around during the day, because we're asking the body to do it. It has to answer the call from calories, and it's going to keep you alive. So it's going to keep brain functioning, it's going to keep organs functioning. And I would say maybe not optimal organ function, but because we definitely see lipid changes and metabolic changes within this low energy availability, but it's going to keep you alive. But then what gets kind of sacrificed in this low energy availability house is all of a sudden now our foundation's not as strong. We might be seeing cracks. We might be seeing termite damage in the wood. All of a sudden, we can't pay bills for gas or electric or water. And what that means is if the body doesn't have enough calories for muscle and bone and hormone health and immune system function, it'll turn them off or slow them down. It'll say, they're conditionally essential. I don't have enough. Now I'm just going to survive as best as I can given the situation. So this house, you can imagine that if a really big storm comes through, think you're stepping off of a curb weird or you're training and maybe form isn't perfect. Our propensity for an injury in this type of low energy availability house is so high, and your propensity to get sick is so high. And people often ask, like, what does it feel like? What does this low energy availability feel like? What are people going to say to me in my office? And you'll see really poor recovery. You'll see people staying sore for a lot longer. So instead of that typical kind of 48 hours of soreness, they're sore for 4, 5, 6 days. Feels like it's really hard to get out of bed. Energy levels feel like crap. Like it's just really hard to get through the day without feeling like you're reaching for a ton of stimulant. Sleep starts to get impacted. We see a ton of night wakings between 2 and 4 a.m. in low energy availability. Stress is poorly managed, so we might see increases in anxiety or depression. And at the end of the day, let's go back to what a goal is of this foundation is resilience. And that's what we're hoping for our service members is that when the call comes, they are ready for the call. And if we're in this low energy availability state, it impacts so many aspects of performance, but also long-term health and just overall health and that ability to do the job that needs to be done. So a huge, huge aspect of that overall performance. This can be calculated if we know a body composition, um, but you can also see it manifest in lab work, and I'll talk a little bit to that later on as well. Um, I'll dive into the how this is manifested within the sports nutrition research. I'll give a note that there is some research coming out, and I guess more calls for research from the community at large that does these energy expenditure studies of looking at relative energy deficiency in the military. For right now, given what we have as tools and really nice visuals in the research, the relative energy deficiency in sport has been very fleshed out, and we can translate that to military. I would say that these calorie deficits even become more pronounced than they do in sport because of some of the natures of the training of military operations. But in this wheel, I apologize if some of these words are really tiny. You can always go reference this paper as well that has a bunch of great tools. But this low energy availability state, that house that I just showed, starts to impact every single organ system. So we see reproductive, bone, gastrointestinal, blood, urinary, lipid and glucose metabolism, behavioral health issues, sleep, cardiovascular function. You can see how many different things are impacted. And let's zoom out because this makes sense. Because if the body doesn't have enough fuel to give to everything, of course it's going to start to manifest all over the place within the body. Um, and then we go into the performance decrement side of the house. So we see what well, from typical things that we would anticipate, some of the power, the strength, the speed, the endurance capacity, those are all things maybe we would expect to see by not having enough fuel. But looking at decreased motivation, decreased cognitive performance. And one of my very first bosses said to me, or said to soldiers that we worked with, your greatest ability is your availability because you've answered the call to serve your country. And if we're not available to do the job, that's problematic. We need to support you in that. And so we want to make sure, again, that these considerations from the performance side are being recognized. And I would also say, when we go back to kind of this physiological side, things that get compounded in this that don't necessarily in the sport world in the same way are some of the stress demands, the environmental demands, and the sleep deprivation demands that come with the job that compound these things even further. So you can think about that just kind of like dumping gasoline on the this kind of fire of inflammation that the body's dealing with. Fantastic resource from that Reds paper. So let's go into military. And I mentioned that there's some research being done on this relative energy deficiency in military and really starting to recognize too, like how big are the deficits that people are operating within. Um, Huge shout out to a colleague and friend, Nick Behringer. He has done so much work as well as USARIUM and the NHRC on looking at what is happening in special operations on different mission sets that people are going on, and how big are the deficits. And a lot of times it can differ. I would say most commonly when we look at expenditures, they're typically between the like 3,500 to 4,500 mark. But then you get into some of these more specific environments and more prolonged mission sets, and you may see expenditures as high as 7,000, 8,000 calories a day. And then you can really start to think about how big of a deficit am I trying to operate in? And this is a call for sure to make sure, again, that foundation is really strong. And when we have control over feeding, that we're doing the best that we can to make sure we're staying on top of adequate fueling needs. But in a deployed situation, sometimes you may not always have so much control. And when we're looking at MRE provision, typically you see like 3 MREs per day. And in some of these more specialized environments, you can see more packets are also provided. And I know Combat Feeding is doing the next presentation. So they are really the expert gurus. And I've done some collaborative work with them in my career and fantastic and such cool things they're doing to innovate feeding. Um, but even if people are eating every part of every single MRE, most are right around like the 1,400 calorie mark. If they're eating every single part of every single MRE, we're still not meeting some of those really high demands, those 7,000 plus calorie demands. So um, that's when we start to understand, okay, if we know that's the situation, we then want to know what kind of deficits can we anticipate to see. So then we on the military side plan more appropriately from a mission set standpoint and kind of what can we expect to get out of the operators that we're working with and better level setting on like we may see performance decrements. We may see cognitive deficits that happen if we're doing more prolonged mission sets in an underfueled state. So some of the baseline places that we start from and where do we start with feeding? And when we do have control, what do we do? And how do we educate people on these periodization models? Um, there's so many wonderful resources that exist out there. USIS and Champ, they're always doing such wonderful stuff. I know that the OPSS did a presentation a couple sessions ago. Wonderful, wonderful resources to be had. And I love this visual of the plate of stand down or power up from the carbohydrate standpoint. So how do we adjust that really baseline fuel that we're looking at for energy needs? So if we're not performing as much, maybe we're doing a ton of computer work that's maybe stressful but not physically demanding. We can stand down a little bit, but maybe we're dialing in a training set and we're really optimizing for you know a field exercise. We're powering up. We're dialing in half of the plate coming from those carbohydrates. The USOPC also has these beautiful visuals that we've utilized for periodization of nutrition, where we're looking at that easy training plate, the moderate training or the harder training, and really educating soldiers on kind of what I said before, that not every single training session should be the same. And we want to empower you with the ability to flux. So if it's a lighter training day, can we flex down to this easier training? Or if we know we're going hard in the paint, let's dial up. Let's really make sure we're focusing on this hard plate. And if we don't know, like let's say we're on a deployment and we don't know what to anticipate for the day, we might look at that moderate training plate as our foundational plate that we're building off of. Given that at any sort of moment, a call can come in that we need to be ready to rumble. A huge question that I get all the time is looking at, okay, so what about fasting? And I'm sure every dietitian ever out there maybe is rolling their eyes because everybody I think is so used to getting this question. But I go back to what I said at the beginning is what are we trying to get? What are we trying to get out of our training? What are we trying to get out of our recovery? And how can we anticipate to get that if we don't have the building blocks to do that? Um, so the only time that I look at fasted states as being something that we would even theoretically purposefully consider as a tool is if we're looking at building up some aerobic base and we're looking at really kind of upregulating those enzymes that mobilize fat, then maybe we would do some like zone 2 training that would be fasted. And I'll put an asterisk on that because that adaptation typically comes more for males than it does for females. So there's not a ton of utility for a fasted state when we're looking at dialing in optimal performance. And I guess if I'm being just completely transparent on how I answer this question when a service member comes to me, or now in my career, if it's fire or police, I say the big three things I consider is number one, does it make sense within training? So if we're training at 6 a.m. and you don't eat till noon, that doesn't make sense. You're staying in breakdown mode for too long, doesn't make sense. Does it make sense? Or energy availability still matters. We still have to make sure we're eating enough to support training volume. And then number three, does it make sense socially? We really, really want to make sure that we're being cognizant of it's not just the service member. Maybe they're going home to family members and they're if they're not eating in the window. I don't love that. That doesn't make sense socially for me either. So really those are the big considerations I give for folks. But getting back to that, what are we trying to get out of training demands and getting the service member in front of us to really think about and verbalize what that means for them. Because most individuals will do their best well fed, and we might be fasted during a mission set, but again, we might see performance deficits because of that. Let's jump into hydration here a little bit. Again, like we're gonna be shifting gears a fair amount here. But in hydration, kind of baseline needs that we look at is at least half of the body weight in ounces of fluid a day as that minimum, and closer to 1 to 1 for the higher losses, the folks that are um, drenched in sweat. You can see the salt lines on their shirt. You can see them on their hats. They're maybe training in extreme environments. We might be diving in higher to that 1 to 1. And I say fluid very specifically because we also would be talking about electrolyte consideration within that as well. I'm thinking about, do I need rapid rehydration for some of these more extreme environments or more extreme training sessions that I might be doing? A big goal, if you're calculating sweat rate, is to keep losses less than that 2% body weight during any sort of mission set or training session. When we get to about 2% losses during training, you'll start to see aerobic performance go down, some of that endurance performance. But as you get into 3% loss, we start to see that aerobic, obviously, that was done at 2. And then we see anaerobic, so that's power and strength and speed. We see cognitive performance go down. We see postural stability go down, so that's that ability to move around barriers effectively as well. Um, and we also see we see a positive identification of a target, so more of that cognitive performance side of the house, and accuracy within shooting go down. So those are some of the big things to educate on from the hydration standpoint. But a huge impact of this is environment as well as gear. So are we wearing a ton of, cold weather gear that is purposefully not breathable. We might be, depending on rate of movement, losing quite a bit of sweat during some of these training sessions. And this paper gives some nice stats, but you'll also see um, these losses really get individualized per person. So when we're dialing in hydration strategies, I really, really encourage to work as much as you can individually. I know when it's like one to many, I think I was to 2,500 individuals. That individual one-on-one work is not as feasible. In monitoring sweat rate, you can get that from body weight. Is really the quickest and dirtiest way of doing that. So measuring how much do you weigh prior to a training session, as light as humanly possible. How much do you weigh after a training session, as light as humanly possible. And then we take into consideration how much they drank to get how much is the average loss per hour. And these papers can give you some tools on that as well. All right, so what can we do to kind of build up that foundation even further? I have to give huge credit to my colleagues in special operations because a lot of this has been done collaboratively with them. But really looking at nutrition as, I think everybody's familiar with PPE, that personal protective equipment. But we like to frame it as what's that personal protective nutrition? So what's building up that foundation to make sure you can perform? But then some of the lifestyle considerations here as well? I don't think any of this is going to be wildly shocking to any individual out there, but looking at how much of that plate is coming from plants, do we have our blood sugar stabilized with good amounts of protein and fiber coming in throughout the day? So are we shooting for that like kind of 35 to 40 grams of fiber? That will likely come along if most of our plates coming from those plant foods. And remember that grains and some of those starches are plant foods as well. Are we getting in anti-inflammatory and antioxidant containing foods? Are we building up a microbiome through fiber and fermented food items? Are we dialing in hydration? And when we're really needing to, are we getting specific to the environment that we're operating within? Um, I would give these the credit that they're due with the other aspects of the multi disciplinary team or interdisciplinary team as leaning on to help support that personal protective lifestyle as well. I think this is helpful to educate on as well because I think about utilizing nutrition as a tool, just like we do anything else within the job. From the supplemental side of the house, I know that OPSS uh, did their presentation. This is kind of how I framework on it. This is not an exhaustive list by any means. I want to give all the caveats on this particular slide of I like to think about it in that same foundation. What am I building on for performance as needed? And then what's really, really individualized? These examples are purely that, just examples that are meant to give ideas um, on different third-party verified options that exist out there. But at the end of the day, this needs to be personalized for the individual. Always should be discussed with a dietitian or provider. Medications, history, health history, other supplementation, all needs to be taken into consideration. And that's really the power of having a dietitian on board, on staff to be able to help guide and educate the team at large on a lot of the supplementation side of the house. The big two that if I'm going to give Kelsey, what do you recommend for almost everybody walking around on this earth? The big two that I always go back to are omega-3s and vitamin D. There's huge benefit from a long-term health standpoint with those, but really when we think about the very specifics of an operator, the exposure to blast, we want to protect that brain and body as best as we humanly possibly can. And so omega-3s are going to be vital within that. Vitamin D has so many different roles between muscle, bone, hormone health, mood, cancer risk reduction. So we look at optimizing those across the board. Always, always, always a reminder on supplement safety. There's some fantastic resources here for you to go into. I have a 2-hour lecture on supplements alone, so I'm not going to belabor this too much, but really there should be so much caution taken in recommendations. There are stuff all over the time on Army bases that is not third-party verified, that soldiers have access to and need to be educated on. And really tying back to things that matter. Every single day of my career, I've talked about testosterone optimization. So really focusing into on things like endocrine disruptors that are present within our supplement world. Um, can be a big motivating factor for service members to pay more attention. Same with heavy metals. There's so much contamination that can be had in unregulated supplements. Again, I'll give a call out for OPSS if you've never visited the website. It is fantastic. There is so many resources on there, and a great place to go to ask an expert as well. So if somebody comes in with a particular supplement or new ingredient you're not familiar with, a great resource. Third-party verification gets broken down here as well from the supplement side of the house so people know what they're getting. And this is an OPSS resource for you to look at. Dining facilities are going to be a huge part of that foundational nutrition. I'll give a shout out to the special ops dietitians who spent 7 years just trying to get dining facility regulations changed. Big rock, big hill, as it often is in government work. But really looking at how are we providing a lot of really colorful things, that personal protective nutrition in the dining facilities themselves. So let's go into that active a little bit and some of the considerations that we take in special ops. At the end of the day, different units have different jobs, but they all need to be prepared for any and all extreme environments, depending on where they're operating. So that might be cold or altitude or heat or desert or underwater operations or boats, or humidity or heat or jungle. So across me, Marines and Navy, Naval Special Warfare and the Air Force, I didn't even put airplanes on here. Airplanes and helicopters would be included as well. Um, the field might look different across the board, and nutrition considerations differ for each and every one of these things. So when we're working with units specifically, we have to understand that environment. What gear are they working with? Are they packing in nutrition? Do they have ability to go back to a pop-up where maybe food service folks are helping us prepare meals? Do they have MREs? Are they feeding in a garrison? Um, are they hunting? When I very first started, one of my very first days of work, I got asked if I knew how to butcher a snake. And I said, no, in fact, I do not. But you know what? I will actually go ask and we'll see what we can do because there is so many different situations that especially special operators get put into and equipping them with as many tools as we can in their toolbox because food is a part of their tactical weapon or tactical toolbox that they should be utilizing. They would never go on a mission without understanding if their comms are ready to go and if their weapon system is ready to go. So they should not be going out on mission without understanding what tool is happening with regard to food and hydration as well. We want to limit liabilities as much as we can in those operational environments. So we'll, you know, snacks and all these things are all well and good, but are they going to freeze? Can I even utilize them? Are they sitting at the bottom of the backpack and they won't be able to be reached? Because so if it's not convenient, we're not going to do it type of mentality. Are they consuming the MREs? So really a ton of education around when given food opportunities to eat, trying to maximize those as much as we can. Do they have some awareness on timing of mission and can they throw some fuel in their mouth before or after? Do they know how long they're anticipated to be out? Again, making it as convenient as humanly possible. Some folks I worked with would wear like little vests and kind of rip cords underneath the gear to make sure that they had food and fluid that was readily available that wouldn't freeze. But at the end of the day, we're supporting mission readiness, so we're supporting that baseline fueling again, going back to that foundation. A huge portion that also needs to be considered at home and in on a deployment is looking at some of these environmental exposures. Again, a 60-minute lecture in and of itself at least, but understanding that our modern day exposure to a lot of these things is quite high, but they're even higher in the military. Um, a lot of this is just not an exhaustive list, but some of the kind of buckets that I consider an environmental exposure is we're dealing with guns and ammo, so you're 1,000% dealing with these heavy metals. Smoke from pollution also contains heavy metal. Um, blasts. So what else is blowing back from some of the explosives that are utilized? Are we near a burn pit? Is there city pollution where we're at? Are we dealing with any sort of like fires that may be nearby? Sometimes even like the National Guard, gets called in to support things within the contiguous United States as it relates to wildfires and some of the pollution they get exposed to there. Um, Food and water. So are they operating in contaminated water? Is there sewage? Going back to that hunting example, there's been several times where I've had folks on deployment buying different food items from local markets, and there's a lot less control over good storage and reduction of foodborne illness. So really taking into consideration these things. And it goes back to that personal protective nutrition is, are we supporting the body well enough to clear these things out as well? So does the liver and the gut have enough support to support excretion of these things? This brings us to the gut. A call out because Dr. Carl, who's the author on this particular paper I referenced here, is going to be doing a OneUp webinar in early 2026. So keep an eye out for him. He is the guru of all things military microbiome. And he's helped all of us dietitians understand how important it is to understand the microbiome's role within, again, exposures. But let's even think about what's the number one cause of loss of duty days on a deployment. It's often travelers' diarrhea. And so, how do we support, again, getting soldiers back on duty, back for the job that they said yes to do? These are a few of the things that can disrupt that gut microbiome that relate to military special operations. And again, I'll go back to that personal protective nutrition. How gut strong is the gut to begin with? And can we equip them for tools? So is that sending probiotics along? Is that sending fiber along as they're traveling, knowing that we might just have abnormal feeding on a deployment or less control, and we really do our best to equip them with the tools that they need as best as we can when they are going into some of these environments. So let's go into the reactive side. So this again is that injury, illness, long-term disease side, and maybe how do we track a few of these things. On the injury side of the house, these would maybe be the less extreme examples I can provide, but we can see some soft tissue injuries, tendon and ligament tears, muscle sprains or strains. We see bone, stress fractures, breaks. Um, a lot of recovery on bone can depend on where was that location of the break and what was its severity. Nerve is a big kind of area in and of itself. So whether that be things are just impinged and, maybe we have things going on with herniated discs. This could be more extreme in the example of limb loss. And do we have nerve pain and kind of phantom pain that we're experiencing from limb loss? Brain is a whole other category, and we're going to delve into that one a little bit more. But traumatic brain injury and blast exposures are appropriately getting the highlighted attention, I think, that they need in the military special operations community, but military community at large, and really is a huge aspect, an area of opportunity for the whole multidisciplinary team to have a large role on support. The more extreme versions of this would be obviously bigger, like limb loss issues that we see. That's drastically going to change uh, nutrition recommendations and recovery timelines. Um, we also see kind of those more, instead of the mild traumatic brain injuries, the more severe traumatic brain injuries. God forbid something cut through a helmet, whatever it might be. A lot of things can happen on a deployment from an injury side of the house. So ready and willing to equip and support as best as we can from that multidisciplinary team approach and doing it safely. We want to do it in a timely fashion for sure, but we want to make sure that we're doing it safely as well and providing the building blocks to support recovery for each one of these areas and then looking at how do we mitigate pain as best as we can. So strategic supplementation for our brain or nerve or bone or even soft tissue of are we looking at collagen peptides or calcium or ALA, or we're looking at omega 3s, things that can help support any one of these different injury areas. So let's dive into traumatic brain injury a little bit because this is such a prevalent one when it comes to the injuries that we see in special operations. And this is DOD numbers. So this isn't just special operation numbers for traumatic brain injury, but these are the DOD numbers for traumatic brain injury. We see over 500,000. So again, it is a common one that we will see. And these are only the ones that are reported. So think about every single time that a service member goes out onto a range, they are getting exposed to microblast exposure. Every single time they are doing combatives, they might be getting exposed to micro trauma exposure on the brain. And cumulatively over time, that can impact that long-term brain health. So again, a huge aspect and area of opportunity to support. Going back to that, how strong is our base and can we get in that anti-inflammatory nutrition to help support long-term cognitive health? But looking at strategic supplementation as well, I in that previous slide mentioned that my two most common are omegas and vitamin D, and you'll see these two here as well. That DHA of the bioactive omegas is going to be supportive of that brain health. It makes up the lining of all those myelin sheath within the brain and can help calm down inflammation within the brain. Creatine is hugely beneficial. So especially if there's any training that individuals are going out where there's known exposure. So let's say a shooting course or a combatives course, we know their brains are going to be getting jostled around. We can strategically start them on creatine prior to those trainings and prior to those types of deployments to make sure we're supporting the brain with that as well. Creatine can cross that blood-brain barrier and offers a nice fuel source for the brain. Um, we might see a lot of B vitamin needs as we're experiencing a lot of energy shifts within a traumatic brain injury. And with the connection between the gut and the brain, there's a lot of opportunity to be had to optimize gut health in traumatic brain injury recovery. Looking at metabolic support, so we see a lot of disruption within glucose metabolism. So that might be, are we strategically utilizing things like exogenous ketones or looking at a very short-term utilization of a ketogenic diet to help support the brain getting the fuel that it needs from a metabolic side and inflammation management, both from nutrition but from supplementation as well. A note that if you haven't already seen this paper, one of the big things from the stress side of the house that relates to traumatic brain injury quite a bit is this uh, combination of experiences that an operator can have that manifest in what's now being called operator syndrome. The reason I bring it up from the nutrition side of the house is we actually see this manifest within lab work quite a bit in the long-term disease risk. So it manifests within the cardiovascular risk, it manifests within metabolic disease, it manifests within hypertension. And at the end of the day, our goal is perform well now, retire well later. So we want to keep you healthy throughout your career and recognizing that nutrition can play a big role in understanding how do we support people at a baseline. That cumulative stress over time is called allostatic load. This is kind of a nice visual of that, like if we have a stress response and come back down, but can it stack over time? And really the nice visual I like of this is there's so many things that contribute to that stress bucket within the body and adequate nutrition, adequate dietary quality, enough protein, enough fiber, enough fluid are all things that are kind of in quotes more controllable than some of the other aspects of the job. So I really, from a stress side of the house, try not to let nutrition be one of those things that's dumping even further into this bucket of stress that the body's able to handle. Again, I mentioned this manifests in lab work. This is not an exhaustive list. Again, I have an entire presentation just on lab work alone, but really getting proactive. What are we tracking over time? Are we looking for some of those lipid changes year after year after year? Are we looking for some of those metabolic changes from an A1C or fasting glucose or fasting insulin side? Do we see hormone changes? And are we tracking those over time to best support that operator or service member's long-term health? From the active side of the house, often I recommend pre and post deployment labs as best as we're able to get those, really looking at how much underfeeding impacted the body and are we tracking that recovery timeline. And then reactive would be what's the stuff we're already kind of dealing with? So are we dealing with that long-term disease? Are we dealing with hormone dysregulation? And are we tracking and trending that to support the long-term health? Um, More from the clinical side of the house and tapping into that medical nutrition therapy side as well. Again, hopefully equipping with some of like the big tools that we look at. Nutrition is one piece of a big puzzle, that big cogged wheel. Again, sometimes it can be one that we maybe have a little bit more control over in certain situations. So it's one I love to educate on and empower people as much as we can. And really reminding the service members, you're worth it. They said yes to a job that is enormously hard to do. And I think it's our calling on the performance support side of the house, whether that be strength coaches or dietitians or athletic trainers or cognitive performance. Um, we're their support. We're the support behind the support that's saying yes to these jobs. So thank you so much for your time. I know wave tops, we cruised through a lot of that today, but hopefully got a kind of a good understanding, at least initially, of some of the big considerations in feeding special operations.
Thanks, Kelsey. This was great, and we really appreciate you sharing your expertise and the importance of nutrition for special operators and also, everyone in the military and other athletes. A couple questions came through. I'll ask one before we get to explaining the CE directions. You alluded to this a little bit, but maybe you can expand on it. It's hard to encourage a balanced eating for nutrition when the soldiers are preoccupied with weight and body composition metrics. Do you have any suggestions for handling that?
Oh, it's such a good question. I'm so grateful you brought it up because I think there's a couple of things to consider here. That pressure of the body comp metrics is so real. I would argue that I saw more body dysmorphia within the military than I have in any other aspect of my career, and I think it's so important to understand that. And I always kind of come back to how do we get you out of a less reactive standpoint for coming into a PT test or coming into a tape test? Can we get you more equipped earlier on so that we're not doing these drastic shifts? And I think tying it back to how hard it is on the body, that like low energy availability house, um, can be helpful. But again, it's so meeting that soldier where they're at and understanding there's probably a lot of, again, stress and behavioral health that might be playing a role within this and is important to consider in both male and female soldiers.
Thanks, Kelsey. Again, we appreciate you sharing your expertise. This was really a fascinating presentation, and we're getting really close on time. So I'm going to go ahead and
Yes.
explain how to get those CE certificates so that folks can get back to their day. First, we'd like to invite you to the final webinar in the Nutrition for the Tactical Athlete series, which is on July 30th at 11 a.m. Eastern, titled Engineering Food for Warfighter Performance, which will be presented by Dr. Aaron Stomberg, the Secretary of the Combat Feeding Research and Engineering Program. And we'll put the link to register for this webinar in the chat. As shared at the beginning of the webinar, this session and several others are part of the Nutrition for the Tactical Athlete series. And these sessions will all be available on demand on the OneOp website. So you can scan the QR code on this slide or access the link that's being shared in the chat to watch those. Additionally, OneOp invites you to join us in August and September for the Academy. The Academy is an annual event bringing together military family service providers from multiple disciplines to address a topic important to the military family readiness system. And this year, we will be bringing together experts and professionals, just like you all, to address key challenges facing military youth well-being. Over the course of 6 weeks, OneUp will deliver a series of professional development opportunities, including an expert panel discussion and 3 live webinars. and the link to register for the Academy events is also in the chat pod. One continuing education credit is available from the Commission on Dietetic Registration, the American Association for Family and Consumer Sciences, and the National Commission for Health Education Credentialing. Certificates of attendance are also available. A link to the webinar evaluation and to receive your continuing education certificate is being placed in the chat pod now. And you can also visit the webinar event page to obtain your certificate. On the event page, you will find the purple continuing education link. After completing the evaluation, you will be directed to select the appropriate CE opportunity, complete a post-test, and then fill in your name and email. Your certificate will then be emailed to you. Please know that some email addresses will direct the certificate to the spam folder, so check there if you do not receive your certificate. And if you have any questions about your CEs, please contact us at the email listed on this slide, ce@oneop.org. And again, a recording of today's webinar will be available on demand within 48 hours to our YouTube channel, which you can access via the event page. Be sure to visit us at our website, oneop.org, to explore upcoming events, articles, resources, and more. And you can also find us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. We will stick around for a few more minutes for those who might need to grab links or information from the chat. But thank you all for attending today. Thank you, Kelsey, for a great presentation, and we hope to see you all next time.
Thank you so much.